This is Woodfield, 4 miles west of Clonakilty. Behind me is the farmhouse where Michael Collins was born on the 16th of October 1890. Michael Collins was part of the 8th generation of the Collins family to live here on this property. And in the early 1920s, Michael Collins' brother Johnny sold the farm here and he moved with his family to Dublin. In the 1980s, Liam Collins, a nephew of Michael Collins, turned the old Collins yard into the Michael Collins Memorial Centre, and it was officially opened by President of Ireland Patrick Hillery in October 1990. In the middle of the Woodfield site is a very fine bust of Michael Collins by the sculptor Francis Doyle Jones. It's dated 1921 when Michael Collins was still alive. This bust stands on the spot where the stairs once stood, leading up to the second floor of a barn. The barn that stood here had a grain loft upstairs, and downstairs on the ground floor it had a stall for milking cows and also a number of stables. Over here we have the original dwelling house. Michael Collins was born there in 1890. His mother decided to build a new house out by the road in 1899, and that old building was then converted for farm use. It was still used as a pigsty up to the 1970s. It's very difficult to know the original design of this building when Michael Collins was born here in 1890. We can only assume that it would have been a typical traditional farmhouse of the period with sleeping quarters under the roof, or the half-loft system as they used to call it. In 1897, Michael Collins' father died in this house, and when he was dying, his family were gathered around his bed. He pointed to Michael's sister Helena and he said to her that she was going to become a nun. And then he pointed to Michael Collins, who was only 6.5 years at the time, and he said to the other family members, "Look after young Michael because he's going to do great things for Ireland yet." Out here at the front of the site is the remains of the new house. Michael Collins' mother organised the building of that house in 1899, and Michael Collins would have lived there from 1899 until he left West Cork in 1906. The new house was burned by the Essex Regiment in April 1921. Even by today's standards, the house that the Collins family built here in 1899 was quite elaborate. Downstairs you had a fine big kitchen. Over in this corner you had the sitting room and the dining room, and over at the other side of the house was the dairy. Upstairs you had 2 big bedrooms in the front of the house, a small bedroom at the back which was Michael's bedroom, and also a store. And you also had 2 staircases. The new house was burned by the Essex Regiment in April 1921 in reprisal for what Michael Collins was doing fighting the British in Dublin. That morning the Essex Regiment came along here in their lorries. They had collected some of the Collins neighbours as prisoners, and they forced the Collins neighbours to burn the house. The neighbours were forced to go to the back of the yard to collect straw and hay from the stacks. That was brought into the building here, into the rooms. They were then given cans of petrol by the soldiers, which was sprinkled on the straw, and then a number of the neighbours were given the matches which were struck, which started the fire. When Michael Collins in Dublin heard that they had burned his family home, he said, "They knew how to hurt me most." After the burning, the ruins of the house stood here for 20 years. In the 1940s, they were building a new mill in the local farmers' co-op, and they removed the stones from this site to use in the building of that mill. So there aren't too many features left of the house today, but if you walk around you can still see a few. Just here is one of the chimney caps that would have stood on top of the chimney originally. Over here is the remains of the fireplace, and you can see a line of brick running along where the fireplace used to be. And here then is the bottom of the crane, which was the hooks on which the pots and pans and the kettles used to hang. Michael Collins, as a 10-year-old boy, used to sit here by the fireside listening to the stories from the local Shanaquis and storytellers in the area. And over here then used to be the dairy, where they used to make the butter. you can still see bolt holes in the floor onto which the milk separator was bolted. This was a machine which had a handle on the front which you turned, and it separated the cream from the milk. Michael Collins, as a young boy, more than likely took his turn working this machine. This is Sam's Cross, a few miles west of Clonakilty. It gets its name from an old highwayman from the 1700s called Sam Wallace. At one time, this was the main road between Clonakilty and Skibbereen. It ran along this way. And of course, wherever you had the horse-drawn carriages or coaches, you had highwaymen who would rob the passengers. And the highwayman that operated around here was Sam Wallace, hence the name Sam's Cross. Now, behind me here is the pub which is called the Four Alls, and that comes into the Collins story as well. Because the day Michael Collins was shot, he went into this pub and he bought a round of pints for his soldiers. Now, the Four Alls name is a very old name. It comes from an old English medieval rhyme. In medieval Britain, the peasants used to have a little rhyme: the king rules all, the bishop prays for all, the knight fights for all, and the peasant works for all. Now, when that was brought into West Cork, it was changed. Instead of the peasant working for all, the farmer pays for all. Behind me is the house where Michael Collins' mother was born, Mary Ann O'Brien, in 1852 or 1853. It's located just across the road from the Four Alls pub at Sam's Cross. Michael Collins' mother got married to Michael John Collins, her neighbour, in 1875, and at the time she was 23 and her husband was 60. Next to the house where Michael Collins' mother was born is the house where Michael Collins met his family for the last time the evening that he was shot. His military convoy pulled up here at Sam's Cross at 6 o'clock that evening. Michael went across the road and paid for some drinks for his men, and later he came into this building here and he had tea with his brother Johnny and his cousins the O'Briens, as it turned out, for the last time. As Michael Collins was coming out the door behind me here, his brother Johnny shouted out after him. He said, "For God's sake, Michael, get into the armoured car, don't somebody shoot you." Michael Collins looked back and laughed and he said, "Surely they're not going to shoot me in my own county." On that occasion he was wrong. This is the Collins monument at Sam's Cross. It's a big lump of Wicklow granite on which a bronze plaque made by the famous Cork sculptor Seamus Murphy was placed. It was unveiled in 1965 by the famous flying column leader Tom Barry. And that was interesting because Tom Barry took the opposite side to Michael Collins after the signing of the treaty. And he actually fought on the anti-treaty side during the Civil War. In Tom Barry's book Guerrilla Days in Ireland, he mentions that he was an anti-treaty prisoner in Mountjoy jail on the 23rd of August 1922, the day after Michael Collins was shot. He said when the word got into the prison that Michael Collins had been killed, you would have imagined that the anti-treaty prisoners would have started roaring and cheering when they heard the news. But instead of that,